So last year, I read a story about a man who made over $1 million from video game tokens. How did he do that? Did he win all the money from playing video games? Turned out, he made over $1 million from selling those video game tokens as Bitcoins. So, this story may not be true and was a bit of an exaggeration, but you can imagine and agree that there's a lot of hype about Bitcoins. And I don't know for sure whether Bitcoin will live up to the hype. Time will tell. But what I do know for sure is that Kubernetes has lived up to its hype. So, like I mentioned in my keynote yesterday, Kubernetes is hot and popular, and it's also very solid and mature. So today, let me present you the top 5 reasons why Kubernetes lives up to the hype. And I'm going to start with number 5 and go up to the top number 1 reason. Are you ready? Number 5, over a decade of experience running containers in production. Unless you're new to Kubernetes, you should know that Kubernetes is based on Google's internal cluster management system named Borg. So Google has been running containers in production for over a decade, and Google built Borg to power its intensive online services like Google Search, Gmail, and YouTube. And this is because of that, even though Kubernetes was still very young, it can leverage the lessons learned, the mistakes, the pain points, and the best ideas from Borg. Just to take a few examples of the Kubernetes features that we learned from the experiences with Borg. For example, in Kubernetes, pod is the smallest unit for scheduling and deployment, and every pod has its own IP address. That removes the complexity, the infrastructure complexity of managing ports. This is crucial and makes it easy to run off-the-shelf open source software because pods can be treated like VMs or physical hosts with access to the full port space. And that's a game changer. So back to our list, top 5 reasons why Kubernetes lives up to the hype. Number 4, Kubernetes is user-focused. When developing Kubernetes, we take users' feedback very seriously. For example, back in 2016, if you want to create a Kubernetes cluster, all you have is a script called kube that you can download from Kubernetes GitHub repository. But the truth is, who has the time to understand the whole script? And most companies won't just download a script and run it to create their own cluster. And most importantly, if the script doesn't work, how do you fix that? So at the time, Kelsey Hightower, I think most of you probably already know Kelsey. He hosted a user empathy session, and he challenged the whole Kubernetes engineering team to create a Kubernetes cluster from scratch without running any script in 45 minutes. And guess who completed the challenge? No one did, including me. But the point was not to complete the challenge. It's about learning the pain points that users faced. Like Kelsey said, when your engineers have the same problems as the people they're building things for, watch how fast those problems get fixed. So right after this user empathy session, a lot of new tools were built to make it very easy to create a Kubernetes cluster. For example, you can use Minikube to start a single node cluster on your laptop, or you can use kubeadm to easily bring your machine and create a conformant Kubernetes cluster on top of it. This is just one example of how much we care about user experience. Moving on, the next one. Number 3, declarative API and automation. So like what Matt and Selena mentioned earlier, Kubernetes is one key principle of Kubernetes is that Kubernetes is very API-centric, and Kubernetes API is declarative rather than imperative. So imperative is like manual driving, and declarative is like an autopilot system. So with imperative API, you need to tell the system each single step that you want it to do to accomplish a task. But with declarative, you can just declare what the final state you want the system to accomplish without telling it how to do it. So this declarative model makes Kubernetes more robust because you'll know in a distributed world, all components can fail at any time. With a declarative model, Kubernetes can be self-healing so that you don't get woken up in the middle of the night and trying to figure out how to provision more machines for your applications because it suddenly becomes very popular. Or you don't need to try to move your applications from one failed machine to a healthy one. You can automate all those tedious works and focus on your application instead of infrastructure. And that's the power of Kubernetes declarative model. The next one on the list. Number 2, Kubernetes runs anywhere. Like I mentioned in my keynote yesterday, Kubernetes provides a convenient abstraction layer over infrastructure. So it is possible to run Kubernetes in all sorts of different environments. And it's also very easy to move Kubernetes from one environment to another. For example, move it from on-prem to cloud. And this offers Kubernetes users a lot of flexibility when designing their distributed platforms. So finally, we've come to the last one. Can you guess what it is? The number one reason why Kubernetes lives up to the hype is, oh, sorry, we're out of time. Guess I'll tell you next year. Just kidding. The number one reason is, of course, it's the community. Kubernetes has a very strong community. Kubernetes has one of the largest, the most active open source communities with over 12,000 contributors. This is because in Kubernetes community, there's no concentration of power and there's no single vendor influence behind. This makes the community open and collaborative. Competitors, they can come together to contribute to Kubernetes. And because everyone can contribute, this enables innovation. Contributors are not the only members in the community. The end users also play an important role. You've probably heard of the story about how Pokemon Go used Kubernetes to handle the unexpected high traffic when it went viral. Kubernetes is also adopted by numerous companies and enterprises, such as banks and retailers, to tackle some of the industry's largest challenges. The last member of the community is the Kubernetes service providers. Because of the variety of those service providers, end users have the flexibility to choose different solutions, and the network effect made Kubernetes so popular. So, this is all our top 5 reasons why Kubernetes lives up to the hype, and this all sounds great. Now we are done, right? No, there's more to do. We still need to work harder to sustain the success. And here are some of the things that I think the community should focus on next. First, quality improvement is forever. If we want to attract more, larger, and wider variety of end users, we need to improve Kubernetes constantly and forever. We need to, for example, we need to make Kubernetes even more scalable. And we need to provide better enterprise-grade security. And we need to make it seamless to upgrade Kubernetes clusters. Next, we need to keep improving and simplifying Kubernetes user experience. For example, how do we make it easy to deploy an application and expose it behind a public endpoint with HTTPS? How do we make it simple to debug services? And how do we make it easy to garbage collect resources when users no longer need them? And how do we remove the sharp edges so that users won't shoot themselves in the foot? Lastly, we see more Kubernetes service providers wanting to customize their versions of Kubernetes. These service providers can diverge and cause inconsistencies. Inconsistencies will then make it harder for end users to switch from one solution to another. And the ability to switch is fundamental to the success of Kubernetes. Today, we already have conformance to prevent defragmentation, and we need to further expand conformance to have even better coverage. Clearly, Kubernetes lived up to its hype, and we don't need more hype. We need to work together as a community to sustain Kubernetes' success by continuing to invest in quality, user experience, and conformance. Thank you.